Well, welcome back to Finance Uncut. On today's episode, currency collapse in 2023.
Joining us now as part of our Curb Your Inflation series is Kyle Bass, Chief Investment Officer at Heyman Capital Management. Which side do you fall on, Kyle? Transitory inflation or longer lasting, potentially more worrisome inflation?
Yeah, Sarah, it's great to be here. I think. Look, we're going to see a short-term, turn down in inflation because the initial inflationary burst was enormous. So this transitory comment may play out to be true for a short period of time. But I think, Sarah, when you look at the money supply, the broad money in the U.S. system, from 1980 to 2010, it vacillated between 50 and 60% of GDP. And post the global financial crisis, it moved up from roughly 60 to 68, 69% of GDP. Now we're approaching 90. So in the 1 year period, 1.5 year period since COVID started, we have introduced 34% more broad money in our system in the shortest time period in the history of the United States. So we're going to see prices stay high and move higher over time if the Fed continues to expand its balance sheet, which I think it will.
Coming in from Zero Hedge, Why Gold? Authored by Adrian Day. Gold has an advantage that Bitcoin does not have, that Bitcoin inherently cannot have, which is its age. Gold has survived and performed its job for literally thousands of years. We shall have to wait a little longer to say that Bitcoin is as good as gold. Gold has maintained its purchasing power during periods of high inflation and sharp deflation when the stock market or the currency collapses. Even during periods of chaos or war, gold holds its value. During these periods, people will look for alternate places for their cash. Gold also shines during periods of instability and chaos, whether it is a declining stock market, civil disturbance, or war. Negative interest rates are spreading like wildfire around the world. Investors have no choice but to look for other places of stores of value. That's why many smart investors are running towards gold. It's also why the big buyers like China and Russia are accumulating as much gold as possible. Here's the bottom line. Negative interest rates and a devaluation of currencies will hurt a lot of people, particularly savers and retirees. But they will also give rocket fuel to the coming bull market in precious metals. Now, I'll put a link to this article in the description below so that you can also click on this urgent video from Doug Casey and have a look at his offer and what he's got there. And Bank of America says US inflation is likely to remain elevated for up to 4 years. And you can see from this chart here that the Bank of America private client cash holdings as a percent of assets under management is now 11.2%. So their clients aren't sitting in cash. They are moving out of cash and into inflationary hedged assets. So I did this video back in February warning about hyperinflation. Dr. Michael Burry from The Big Short had been warning about hyperinflation, tweeting it out, and actually got a visit from the SEC because of it. But also on Twitter, I asked Professor Richard Werner a question about how, what we're doing isn't going to end up like Japan. And Professor Werner replied saying Japan's out, Weimar Germany is in. And he compared with what we're doing now. He was saying 2023 is going to be like 1923 with the German Weimar hyperinflation. And then I did this video a couple of months ago, inflation warning, what's better, silver or gold? And Professor Richard Werner did an interview with former Fed advisor and economist Danielle DiMartino Booth, where once again, he talked about hyperinflation. So let's just cut to a short clip from this video that I did.
Well, Richard, I think on that note, you've resolved the biggest burning question, and that is that we are indeed going to get inflation. I'd love to circle back in about a year and dive deeper into what we're going to see here in the next 12 months. But I so appreciate your time today. This was riveting. I recommend your book, and the documentary is absolutely fascinating. And I look forward to doing this again.
Thank you very much. If we're lucky in a year's time, we will still only have modest inflation. It will have ticked up. It's already now ticking up, you know. So it will still be modest, and we then can discuss comparisons with 100 years ago in Germany, Weimar Germany, because, you know, we have some time, hopefully, if we're lucky, in this run up to inflation. But I think there is, particularly if you put the political scenario together with this and the central bank digital currency and the goal to reduce the number of banks. And of course, central bank digital currency is supposed to be linked to some kind of global new monetary architecture, financial architecture. Therefore, you know, it's possible that Weimar style high inflation, even hyperinflation, could be a scenario that could be encouraged by some. And so, yeah, we probably will still be talking about inflation, I think, but let's see.
So from February this year, when he first made the claim of hyperinflation in 2023, to a couple of months ago with this interview with Danielle DiMartino Booth, where he was still hinting at the same thing. Now he's just done another interview where he was asked about his call earlier this year of hyperinflation and whether he is sticking to that or not. So let's cut to that interview now.
Well, in 2008, we didn't have inflation. Except asset inflation, of course, but we're talking about consumer price inflation here. So, I mean, my analysis was that there's a big difference to the policies taken by central banks in 2020 compared to 2008 to 2009. Namely, there's an expansion in credit creation and broad money, and therefore affecting also the real economy and therefore consumer prices. And that has panned out. It looks like they've been slowing things down a little bit, which is good news, because my fear has been since last year that we're moving towards a Weimar style, you know, 1923 style hyperinflation. And I think this is still very much on the cards, but I would prefer it if you know, that was delayed by a few years, because that's a big thing, and that does need some preparation for people, at least those who see it and who understand what this means, to get ready for it, because it's devastating. It's completely devastating. So I was delighted to find that central bank credit creation seems to have slowed a little bit, and therefore at the moment, it looks like, yes, we have inflation, and that's probably going to continue, but it's not yet moving into this accelerating scenario where you get higher and higher and higher inflation. And that's good. But I think ultimately that's still on the cards, given the overall scenario. I mean, you have to look at where we are and what has happened so far, and what central banks have done so far. And so I think it is still one of the core options that could be used in order to achieve a number of things, such as, you know, this massive amount of debt that exists and national debt that exists, and ultimately inflation, of course, is a way of getting rid of that on the one hand, and also dealing with some of the goals that you know, well, the planners like to achieve, including the more strategic and long-term goals of rearranging the global financial architecture, for which, again, big crises, and, you know, we are talking about a major crisis, not just like a 2008 one, because, you know, when you get hyperinflation, this really wipes out much of your economy, well, a certain part of the economy, the one that is not prepared, which usually means ordinary people and the majority of the population, and so on. But anyway, it's a major impact, and that's usually quite useful in order to rearrange the global financial architecture, if that's what you're planning to do. And of course, we have a lot of statements saying that, oh, that's what they're planning to do.
Okay, so you think there's potential that they're trying to cause the crisis? to have this global rearrangement.
Yes, yes, of course, yes. And as you know from my book, Princes of the Yen, shown here, it turns out many crises have been engineered in order to achieve political and economic goals. And of course, we know already that the 2020 crisis has been due to government overreactions, to put it very mildly. In other words, entirely government caused, and therefore there are clear parallels to what I describe in Princes of the Yen, or in the documentary that's on YouTube. It's got now 2.7 million viewers. With inflation becoming an issue, that makes assets, and particularly real assets, more attractive. So property, real estate, but in some countries they're already in bubble proportions, like Germany, where I warned in 2009 that was likely to be the beginning of an asset bubble, and that was actually the bottom, and then it's been, property prices have been rising since. So then, of course, when it's already very expensive, it's kind of tricky, but still it's the fact that it's better to have real assets. Gold is also attractive. The price, in my view, has been artificially suppressed, but that means the opportunity is still there for investors to get in. And with gold, of course, the risk is that if it's known that you have gold, it may be confiscated, as happened in even the land of the free, right? In the United States of America in 1933, presidential executive order was issued to confiscate the gold of all people in America. And so it's best to buy it anonymously, so there's no record that you have the gold. But in many countries, they've now introduced ceilings to how much gold you're allowed to buy in cash without giving away your details. So that's something to keep in mind with gold.
And also coming in from Zero Hedge, the Fed faces the greatest risk in its history, an economic crisis accompanied by inflation. This is from Eric Peters, the Chief Investment Officer of One River Asset Management. And the greatest risk it now faces in meeting its mandate is an economic crisis accompanied by inflation. Such a crisis would force it to choose between a return to orthodox policy and the consequent defaults that would devastate asset prices, or a currency collapse and runaway inflation that rebalances the value of our assets and liabilities. Without a determined improvement in our politics, it is increasingly likely that we must endure the latter, followed by the former. And this drama will surely play out in the decade ahead. And that is my base case, that is my thesis, that we will have runaway inflation, that ultimately central banks will choose to keep rates as low as they can. We'll have very deep negative real rates, which is going to be devastating for savers and retirees and bondholders. They are going to take a massive haircut. But ultimately, interest rates will rise, causing huge amounts of defaults and bankruptcies, which is going to devastate asset prices. So that's my base case. I always move my portfolio around. I am not an inflationist or a deflationist. I just look at the macro. I look at what it tells me. At the moment, it tells me inflation. It tells me that fiscal has taken over from monetary, that it's not just central banks creating bank reserves, that those bank reserves just sit there and the commercial banks stop lending or just don't lend with that credit growth, which drives that CPI. This time we've got fiscal driving, we've got MMT driving, and we are seeing central banks around the world, more and more of them are owning those government securities, those bonds, which basically means that the central banks are monetizing that government debt. And that's why I'm in the inflation camp at the moment. But if things change, I will change and I will adjust my portfolio. I always have hedges. I short, I have other You know, I've shared in other videos that I do hold US dollars. As crappy as I think they are, I do hold US dollars as a small portion of my overall portfolio. So anyway, what do you guys think? Love to see your thoughts and comments below. Don't forget to hit that like button if you like this video. Really appreciate that, guys. If you haven't yet subscribed, do so. Hit that notification bell so you get all my videos. Take care, everyone, and I'll see you again on another episode of Finance Uncut.